Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something fascinating.
Yeah,
It's this convergence point, where deep, complex philosophy meets, well, actual cutting edge hardware.
that's right. We're tackling what might be the essential question for our times. As we get closer and closer to linking our minds directly with machines, how on earth do we build in the ethical guardrails? How do we make sure this goes right?
Exactly. And our mission today is to try and give you a cohesive picture of this. We've got sources that cover, like you said, these incredibly theoretical ideas. What does it even mean for a machine to be a moral agent?
Uh-huh. And then on the flip side, we have the super practical stuff. The nuts and bolts of brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, how they're growing exponentially, how they physically connect us to tech.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this synthesis, this coming together. It feels like there are these two massive forces building up at the same time.
Yeah, definitely.
You've got technology pushing for, let's call it human cognitive augmentation, using BCI to read our minds, stimulate them, maybe even enhance them.
Right. Improving memory, communication, control, all that potential.
But then simultaneously, there's this growing demand from the philosophy side, from AI ethics, saying, hang on, we have to ensure these systems we're creating possess some kind of artificial moral agency.
We need machine ethics before we hardwire ourselves into the network. That's the crux of it.
So the core tension really isn't just about how fast we can make these machines, is it?
No, not at all. It's becoming much more about ethics, about embedding values into the technology itself. Our sources actually point towards this emerging idea they call conscious tech. It's sort of a mandate, really, a push for innovation driven by moral design.
Conscious tech. Okay, I like that. And the material we're drawing on is really diverse. We've got this detailed mini review looking at 4 specific ways people are thinking about artificial consciousness.
Different frameworks for trying to build ethical AI.
Then there's this huge data-heavy analysis of BCI trends, where the research is happening, the geopolitics, which is eye-opening, and some pretty alarming gaps in who's actually doing this work.
Yeah, the global disparities are quite something.
And finally, we're looking into this conscious tech movement itself, what it means, what its principles are. So let's dive in, starting right at the foundation, the philosophical blueprint for an ethical machine.
Okay, so first base, a really big philosophical question. Do you actually need consciousness for something to be a moral agent? I mean, if you look at us, humans, our legal systems, our ethics, it's all tied up with awareness.
Right.
Intention, feeling.
Aspects of consciousness, basically. And you've got major thinkers, people like David Chalmers, Butlin, and others, who argue, yeah, you absolutely cannot separate the two.
Their point is, if you manage to create something genuinely conscious, artificially conscious, well, the ethical game changes instantly. Now you've got a being that might have rights, that demands totally different treatment. The stakes just go through the roof.
But that's where the debate really kicks off, isn't it? Because there's a very strong counter-argument. People like Joanna Bryson.
Ah, yes. Bryson's view is, let's say, influential and controversial. She basically argues that consciousness, it's not necessary for moral agency in AI, maybe not even desirable.
Not desirable. Wow. Okay, that's a strong stance. She famously argued that robots should be slaves. Can we unpack that a little? What are the implications if we go down that road?
Well, the appeal is, frankly, simplicity and control. If machines are just property-sophisticated tools, then their moral job is just to do what we tell them, serve human needs. You avoid this incredibly messy, ethical, legal swamp you'd get with sentient AI demanding rights.
So keep it simple, treat them as objects.
That's the gist of Bryson's argument. Moral agency, she'd say, is a human thing for humans. Treating AI as property cuts through the complexity, but,
Yeah.
and it's a big but, the critics worry, right? If we design these incredibly smart autonomous systems but treat them purely as instruments, could that actually erode our own ethical sensitivity?
How
By normalizing the idea that highly functional, intelligent beings can just be used, could that bleed over into how we view other intelligences, animals, maybe even certain groups of humans? It's a serious concern about kind of moral numbing.
That really sharpens the debate, doesn't it? Are we building companions that feel or just compliant tools that follow rules? Which leads us neatly into how researchers try to define this formally, the artificial moral agent, or AMA.
Right, the AMA framework from Wallach and Allen. It's useful because it plots AI on 2 axes, autonomy and ethical sensitivity.
Okay, autonomy is pretty straightforward. Can it act on its own?
Exactly. How independent is it? How independent is it? Ethical sensitivity, though, that's the tricky one. Can it actually perceive the moral dimensions of a situation? Can it evaluate them and act accordingly?
And where does current AI fall on this chart?
That's the worrying part. Their research highlights that a lot of modern AI, especially the learning-based systems, scores medium to high on autonomy. Think self-driving trucks, automated trading systems. They can act independently. But they score really low on ethical sensitivity. So you have these powerful, autonomous agents basically operating without a reliable moral compass. They can do things, but they don't necessarily grasp why they shouldn't cause harm.
That sounds potentially dangerous, highly capable, ethically blind.
Precisely. And that danger is what drives the push to develop frameworks to actually inject that ethical sensitivity. The first big attempt was what's called the top-down system.
Top-down, so like programming in the rules from the start.
Pretty much. Think of it as the legalistic approach, championed by folks like Arkin back in 2009. You basically hard-code ethical rules, laws of war, UN human rights declarations, that kind of thing, directly into the AI's architecture.
Like Asimov's 3 laws, but hopefully more robust.
Maybe a bit more complex, yeah. The AI becomes essentially a compliance engine. For doing anything, it checks. Does this violate Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 1000?
Okay, that sounds safe in principle. But what happens in messy real-world situations where rules might conflict or something totally unexpected happens? Can a purely rule-based system cope?
That's exactly its weakness. It tends to be incredibly rigid and computationally very heavy. Imagine a combat drone having to verify every single potential action against the entire Geneva Convention before it fires.
It would just freeze up, paralyzed by the rules.
Exactly. Real-world ethics is full of gray areas, conflicting duties. A rigid top-down system often just can't handle that kind of nuance or speed. It bogs down.
So if pure rules aren't flexible enough, we need something more dynamic. Which brings us to the next idea. Framework 1. Global Workspace Theory, GWT, adapted for machine ethics.
Right, GWT. This borrows from cognitive science, specifically Barr's model of human consciousness, and people like Wallach adapted it for AI ethics around 2011. The basic idea is that our minds have lots of specialized unconscious processors all working in parallel.
Doing different things simultaneously.
Yeah, analyzing sensory input, retrieving memories, whatever. And they're all competing for access to this limited serial resource called the global workspace. Think of it like the stage, the spotlight of conscious awareness. Only one or a few things can be on stage at once.
Okay, I think I follow. So how does that apply to AI ethics? Are the processors running different moral calculations?
Precisely. Instead of processing vision or sound, you have processors analyzing a situation from different ethical angles. One might run a utilitarian calculus, what action brings the greatest good? Another checks against core duties, are we violating any fundamental rules? A third might look at past similar situations, what worked ethically before.
So they all sort of debate it internally.
In a computational sense, yes, they compete. The processor, or coalition of processors, that makes the strongest case, or seems most relevant to the current context, wins access to the workspace. And that winning perspective dictates the AI's action. It's a hybrid system. It has rules, but also context and competition.
That sounds much more flexible. But you mentioned something about responsibility. How does GWT help determine if the machine is actually responsible for its actions?
This is where it gets really interesting, based on analysis by the philosopher Levy. He looked at GWT and argued that an agent, human or AI, is only truly morally responsible for an action if that GWT process was fully working, if the action resulted from a specific processor effectively winning control of the workspace.
Meaning the system, in a sense, intended the action. It wasn't just a glitch.
Exactly. It wanted to do it, computationally speaking, because that specific way of analyzing the situation prevailed. It gives us a potential way to distinguish between a random error and a computationally chosen action.
That's a huge step towards accountability. Is there a way to test this? Has anyone tried?
Yes, Bellow and Bridewell did exactly that. They used their Arcadia software system to simulate a scenario, a self-driving car, controlled by the AI, hitting a pedestrian.
Okay, a classic ethics dilemma. How did they apply GWT to liability there?
They defined responsibility based on where the system's focus of attention was, and whether its computational resources were committed to the action that caused harm.
Walk me through that. Committed resources.
Okay, so imagine the pedestrian steps out. If the AI's main computational focus, its global workspace, detected the pedestrian, analyzed their trajectory, and then adjusted the car's path towards hitting them, perhaps to avoid a bigger crash, or maybe due to a flawed ethical weighting, then its resources were committed to that action, It chose that outcome based on the information it processed. In that case, under this GWT framework, the AI bears responsibility.
What if it wasn't focused?
If, say, the pedestrian stepped out suddenly after the AI had already committed its resources to making a different turn, or if a sensor failed and the information never even reached the workspace, then it's a system failure, a tragic accident perhaps, but not a morally responsible act by the AI itself. It didn't choose it in the GWT sense.
Okay, that's a really nuanced way to think about machine fault versus machine, well, culpability. Powerful stuff. But GWT is mostly about processing information flow, right? The next idea seems different. Framework 2, internal models and self-awareness. This sounds more about the physical world.
It is, yeah. This approach, drawing on work by Hessel and Holland, suggests the mind builds internal models. A model of itself, its body, its abilities, its current state, and a model of the world outside. Consciousness, in this view, is basically interacting with and running simulations within these internal models.
Like a flight simulator in your head.
Kinda, yeah. And if you can simulate, you can predict. You gain foresight, and foresight is absolutely critical for ethical behavior, right? You need to anticipate the consequences of your actions.
Makes sense. So how would an AI use this ethically?
Winfield and Pitt gave a good example. Imagine a robot caring for someone near an open ditch. The robot perceives the person walking towards the hazard. Its internal model includes itself, the person, and the ditch. It can then run quick simulations. If I move here, can I block their path? What's the optimal way to intervene? It simulates the protective action before physically doing it.
So it's predicting outcomes to choose the safest action.
Exactly. The internal model allows for rapid consequence analysis.
But the limitation there must be the accuracy of the models, right? The simulation is only as good as the map.
Absolutely. You need really good, constantly updated models of both the self and the world. But we're actually making progress there. Lipson's group at Columbia, for instance, developed an algorithm that let a robot arm build a pretty sophisticated 3D model of itself just by looking at camera images, like seeing itself in a mirror and figuring out its own shape and movement.
Wow, okay, so that's feasible. But even with foresight, does the robot care? This brings us to Framework 3, proto-morality via embodiment and feeling. Now we're talking about simulating empathy.
Yeah, this is Asada's territory. He hypothesized that real ethical behavior, beyond just following rules or predicting outcomes, needs something like empathy, a kind of proto-morality.
How on earth do you build that into a machine?
Well, the proposed architecture is fascinating. It involves two main parts. First, a simulated pain system, a way for the AI to register negative states related to its own integrity. Second, and this is key, a simulated mirror neuron system.
Mirror neurons. Those are the brain cells linked to empathy in humans, right? They fire when we see someone else do something or feel something.
Exactly. The idea is to create emotional contagion computationally. If the AI observes another agent showing signs of distress, which its sensors pick up, its mirror neuron system fires, creating a similar distress state within the AI itself. It computationally feels what the other is feeling.
Okay, that sounds incredibly complex. How do you ground something like a feeling in a machine? It doesn't have biology.
That's where Mann and Damasio's work on homeostatic systems comes in. It offers a way to ground motivation. Think about basic biological drives maintaining temperature, energy levels, homeostasis.
Keeping things stable internally.
Right. So imagine an AI designed to maintain a stable internal state, maybe optimum processing load, battery level, whatever. If something happens that pushes it away from that stable state, that deviation is computationally registered as a negative feeling. Getting closer to stability is a positive feeling.
Ah, so feelings become markers of internal stability or instability.
Exactly. It gives the machine an intrinsic motivation. Seek stability, positive feeling. Avoid instability, negative feeling. Now, combining that with the mirror neuron system. If the AI observes another agent moving into an unstable state, and its mirror neurons reflect that instability internally.
It experiences a negative feeling itself based on the other state.
Precisely. And because it's motivated to resolve negative feelings, it's now motivated to help the other agent return to stability. It generates a form of functional empathy, a drive to help based on this shared, simulated feeling state.
That's a really clever way to potentially build intrinsic motivation for ethical action. Fascinating. Okay, so that's 3 frameworks. The last one, Framework 4, functional requirements and wisdom, seems to shift focus again, back to pure function.
It does, yeah. This is the approach from Briggs, Jordan, Sundar. They define cognitive consciousness based purely on what the system can do functionally, regardless of whether it feels anything subjectively.
So it's about capability, not inner experience.
Right. They introduced this measure called lambda, to quantify the degree of cognitive consciousness needed for specific tasks. It's an axiomatic definition based on functional benchmarks.
And what did their analysis predict about where current AI stands?
This is quite significant, especially for the deep learning world. They predicted basically zero cognitive consciousness for simple machines, which makes sense. But crucially, they also predicted a fundamental discontinuity between human-level cognitive consciousness and what current learning-based AI, like large language models, can achieve.
A discontinuity, meaning just scaling up current models, won't get us there.
That's their prediction. No matter how much data you pour into a transformer model, it won't cross that threshold to achieve the high-level cognitive functions defined by Lambda. It implies we might need fundamentally new architectures for truly conscious, or at least highly capable ethical AI.
That's a big claim. Now, related to this functional view is the idea of artificial wisdom or phronesis. What's that about?
Phronesis is an ancient Greek concept, usually translated as a practical wisdom. Sullins and others proposed artificial phronesis as the goal for ethical AI. It's not just about following rules, like the top-down approach, or even just simulating empathy. It's about solving ethical problems wisely.
Wisely. What does that mean for an AI?
It means drawing on experience, understanding the nuances of context, seeing the bigger picture, and crucially, being able to improvise effectively when faced with completely new ethical dilemmas that weren't explicitly programmed.
So going back to the top-down AI freezing, when Rule A conflicts with Rule B, what would a frenetic AI do?
A frenetic AI would access its experience, its knowledge base, its understanding of context. It might recognize, for instance, that Rule A, protect human life, almost always outweighs Rule B, minimize property damage, even if the rules themselves don't explicitly state that hierarchy. It could weigh the specific values involved. Is the property trivial or irreplaceable? Is the human risk minor or severe? And improvise a solution that best upholds the underlying ethical principles, even if it bends a specific rule.
So judgment, basically. How do you even start to build that?
One interesting avenue researchers like Cella are exploring is using inner speech. They're studying robots that engage in a kind of internal monologue while performing tasks, like setting a table in a nursing home with residents who have different needs and preferences.
The robot talks to itself about the ethical choices it's making.
Sort of, yeah. It might internally articulate the trade-offs. Okay, resident X needs soft food, but resident Y prefers the blue plate. Placing the fork here might be easier for resident Z's grip. This internal dialogue, if observable or inferable, can signal to humans that the robot is actively reasoning about the ethical context, weighing different values. It's seen as a step towards demonstrating phronesis, that practical wisdom.
Okay, that gives us a really comprehensive map of the philosophical landscape. 4 very different sophisticated approaches to building ethics into AI. But as you said at the start, these ideas stop being purely theoretical the moment we connect them to the real world, especially when that connection is directly to the human brain via BCI.
Exactly. Let's pivot now to the hardware. Brain-computer interfaces, BCIs.
Yep.
What are we actually talking about here? It's a direct communication link, right?
Yeah.
Between the brain, the central nervous system, and some kind of external device.
A computer, a robotic arm, a drone, anything, really. And crucially, it bypasses the normal pathways, the peripheral nerves and muscles.
That's the key. And while the future promises all sorts of augmentation, it's important to remember the primary driver, the main ethical justification right now, is restorative.
Helping people with severe neurological conditions regain function.
Absolutely. Conditions like ALS, locked-in syndrome, spinal cord injuries, stroke recovery, restoring communication, movement, control. That's the core mission.
And technically, how do they work? What are the basic components?
You generally need 3 things. First, signal acquisition. You need electrodes to actually pick up the brain's electrical activity. Second, signal processing. Algorithms to clean up that noisy signal, extract meaningful features like the intention to move your hand or selecting a letter on a screen. And third, the application, translating those processed signals into a command for the external device.
Okay. And the big debate within BCI tech always seems to come down to this trade-off, right? Invasiveness versus signal quality.
That's the fundamental dilemma. You've got invasive BCIs on one end. These involve surgery implanting electrode grids, like ECOG, on the surface of the brain, or even microelectrode arrays deeper inside the cortex.
The upside being?
Much better signal quality. Higher accuracy, better spatial resolution. You can pinpoint signals more precisely. But obviously it requires brain surgery, carries risks, and is mostly used for severely disabled individuals or in animal research right now.
And the alternative? The stuff we see more often commercially.
That's the non-invasive BCIs. Primarily EEG, which uses electrodes and a cap on the scalp to measure electrical fields, and FNIRs, which uses near-infrared light to track blood flow changes related to neural activity.
No surgery, much safer, cheaper.
Exactly. They're portable, relatively inexpensive. But the downside is the signal quality. The skull blurs and weakens the electrical signals for EEG, and FNIRS is slower and it measures blood flow, which is an indirect proxy for neural firing. So you have the weaker signals, lower spatial resolution. It's harder to decode fine-grained intentions.
So where's the sweet spot right now for wider use?
For most consumer or non-critical applications, EEG and FNIRs are the best compromise we have today. And the technology is improving rapidly, especially dry electrode technology for EEG. That makes the caps much easier to put on and use, removing the need for conductive gel. That's a big factor driving accessibility.
And the research effort globally. It's massive, right? The source mentioned analyzing tens of thousands of publications.
Yeah, over 25,000 papers analyzed. The trend is undeniable. Exponential growth. The sheer volume of research publications increased about 1.5 times just between 2016 and 2021. This isn't just slow, steady science. It's an explosion of interest and investment.
It signals that this is seen as a really foundational technology for the future.
Absolutely. And that investment angle brings us to the geopolitics, which the data really highlighted. Specifically, China's dominance in terms of output.
What did the numbers show there?
Starting around 2019, China's publication rate in BCI just took off exponentially. They are now exceeding the output of the U.S. It strongly suggests neurotechnology is viewed as a key strategic domain for them, not just a medical field.
Driven by government policy.
It seems very likely. It aligns perfectly with their Made in China 2025 strategy, which explicitly targets global leadership in critical technologies by mid-century. BCI appears to be one of those targeted areas, receiving significant state funding and focus.
Which makes the other side of the geopolitical coin even more stark, the Global South gap.
Yeah, this was really alarming. The analysis showed that the entire continent of Africa, for example, generated less than 1%, 0.95% of all BCI publications.
Wow! Less than 1%.
And it's not for lack of need. There are tens of millions of people in Africa with disabilities who could potentially benefit massively from this technology. The reasons cited are what you might expect: insufficient funding, lack of access to the necessary technology and infrastructure.
That raises huge ethical questions, doesn't it? If BCI becomes central to communication, collaboration, even cognitive enhancement, excluding huge parts of the world from the development phase seems incredibly problematic.
It absolutely is, especially if we move towards collaborative BCIs, linking minds together. If you're building a global brain but leaving out 1 billion people.
Yeah.
That's not just unfair, it potentially limits the capability and robustness of the entire system. It risks baking in inequality at a fundamental level.
A critical point. Okay, let's shift to the frontier applications. Where is this tech heading beyond basic restoration? First up, thought decoding.
Right. This is moving beyond simple motor commands. The prediction is that future BCIs could achieve much more accurate mapping of complex thoughts into actions, or even objects.
Like controlling a drone just by thinking about where you want it to go?
Exactly. Or operating complex machinery remotely, using thought alone. Think cognitive remote control. There's also research looking into using BCI to potentially improve lie detection, trying to decode neural signals associated with deception, maybe more reliably than traditional polygraphs that just measure physical responses.
Okay, that's potentially intrusive. What about memory augmentation? That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does, but it's moving towards reality. The idea is devices, maybe like portable flash drives, that could interface with the brain via BCI to either extract information, like backing up memories, or potentially introduce information, a physical extension of your memory.
Has this actually been done in humans?
There's been significant progress. Hampson and colleagues, back in 2018, used neuroprosthetic systems based on what are called MIMO models. Multiple input, multiple output to stimulate the brain in patterns that demonstrably improve both short-term and long-term memory recall in human participants. They show they could restore and even enhance memory function.
Boosting memory recall rates. That's incredible. So the potential to back up, upgrade, maybe even share memories, which leads directly to the most mind-bending application: telepathy communication or brain-to-brain interface, BBI.
Right. This is where you combine BCI, reading from a brain, with CBI, writing to a brain, to create a direct link. BBI aims for communication without any need for speech, gestures, or screams.
Direct mind to mind. Seriously.
The proof of concept experiments are already happening. There have been studies where rats shared sensormotor information brain to brain, and Jiang and colleagues had humans play a Tetris-like game collaboratively where one person used EEG to think the command, like rotate piece, and that signal was transmitted via TMS to stimulate the other person's brain, causing them to execute the rotation.
Wow. Transmitting game moves directly between brains.
Exactly. The ultimate vision here is linking multiple brains, maybe even over the Internet of Things, allowing for the exchange of complex thoughts, ideas, maybe even experiences, without the limitations of traditional language.
That idea of linking multiple brains naturally leads to collaborative CBCIs, systems designed to integrate input from several people at once.
Yes, and the goal here isn't just communication, it's superior performance. These CBCI systems take neural data from multiple users working on a task together and synthesize it to make a better joint decision than any individual could alone, or even than the group could, using normal methods like voting.
How does that work? How do you combine brain signals effectively?
Poli and his team developed a really interesting hybrid CBCI. It didn't just look at the neural signals related to the decision itself, but also incorporated the user's response times as an indicator of their confidence.
Ah, so faster response equals higher confidence.
Generally, yeah. By computationally weighting the input from each person based on this combined neural and behavioral measure of confidence, their CBCI system improved the group's overall decision accuracy by as much as a third compared to just having them vote normally.
A third better, just by integrating brain data and response times.
That's what they found. It's a powerful demonstration that these systems, by tapping into neural information about conviction and processing, can genuinely create a collective intelligence that outperforms the sum of its individual parts.
Okay, so this is where it all comes together, right? The complex philosophical needs we outlined in part 1, the need for machines to have intention, maybe wisdom, maybe empathy.
All those frameworks for artificial consciousness.
They suddenly become incredibly urgent, practical problems when you look at the BCI hardware from part 2, especially those augmentation technologies, memory enhancement, brain-to-brain interfaces. The theory meets the road, hard.
Precisely. The philosophical debates aren't abstract anymore. They become immediate, real-world threats and challenges the moment this technology starts getting commercialized and widely deployed. And the first big collision point is cognitive liberty, privacy, and mind reading.
Yeah. If these devices, especially the easier-to-use, non-invasive ones with dry electrodes, are constantly reading brain signals, what's to stop them picking up more than we intend?
That's the core fear. Unrestricted access. Could they infer your health status, your political leanings, your emotional state, maybe even sensitive information like passwords or PNs if they correlate with specific neural patterns? And the real worry is this could happen without you even knowing it.
And the lack of clear rules or standards makes it worse.
Massively. There just isn't specific, globally agreed upon regulation governing what BCI data can be collected, how it can be used, how it must be protected. It's a bit of a Wild West right now, and that significantly ramps up the privacy risk.
Are there technical fixes being looked at? Ways to protect our thoughts?
Yes, people are working on it. One idea gaining traction is the concept of a mental password.
A mental password?
Yeah, basically a specific, deliberate sequence of thoughts or mental commands that you have to consciously generate to unlock the BCI's output. So the device wouldn't just broadcast any stray neural firing. It would only transmit information when you actively sign it with your mental key. It tries to put control back in the user's hands.
Okay, that's clever. But privacy is just one issue. The second big challenge takes us right back to GWT and that Arcadia simulation. Agency, responsibility, and liability.
If a BCI system is involved in an error, maybe a BCI-controlled crane drops its load, or a DCI-piloted vehicle crashes, who is actually responsible? The user, the manufacturer, the algorithm.
It's already hard enough with current autonomous systems.
Exactly. And BCI adds another layer of complexity, especially with those brain-to-brain interfaces we talked about. Imagine an action is initiated by person B, the decoder, based on input received directly from person A's brain, the encoder, maybe via some intermediary tech.
Yeah.
If that action causes harm, who's liable?
Person A, who had the original thought. Person B, who executed the action. The technology in between that might have misinterpreted the signal.
You see the problem. Our current legal and ethical frameworks just aren't equipped to handle this kind of distributed agency, this technologically mediated intent. We're building tech that fundamentally blurs the lines of responsibility faster than we can redraw them.
A legal and ethical minefield. And then there's the third challenge, maybe the most immediate for invasive tech: safety and biocompatibility.
Right. Putting electrodes directly in or on the brain isn't trivial. There are significant risks associated with the surgery itself: infection, bleeding, nerve damage.
And even if the surgery goes well,
the body can still react negatively over time. There's the issue of biocompatibility. The device might trigger an immune response or inflammation. Scar tissue can form around the electrodes.
which would degrade the signal.
Exactly. That scar tissue can insulate the electrodes, making the signal weaker and noisier over months or years, potentially rendering the very expensive and risky implant less effective or even useless.
Yeah.
So there's a built-in challenge of long-term stability and performance that we're still grappling with.
Okay, so we have these converging problems: threats to privacy, blurred lines of responsibility, physical safety risks. It really feels like this demands a different way of thinking about innovation itself.
It absolutely does. And that's the driving force behind this conscious tech movement we mentioned earlier. It's a pushback against the old model of move fast and break things.
So shifting the focus from just can we build it to should we build it, and if so, how should we build it?
Precisely. Conscious tech aims to provide a modeling context, a framework for creation that puts ethics, safety, and societal well-being right at the heart of the innovation process. It's defined by 4 core principles that try to address these challenges head-on.
Okay, let's break them down. Principle 1, ethics first. What does that mean in practice?
It means ethics isn't a checkbox you tick at the end. It has to be baked in from the very beginning. Every design choice, what data you collect, how the AI makes decisions, what failure modes are acceptable, has to be evaluated through an ethical lens.
So transparency, accountability, involving ethicists earlier in the design phase?
All of the above. For instance, instead of just grabbing as much neural data as possible because more data is better, an ethics-first approach might mandate designing the system for data minimization. Collect only what is absolutely necessary for the function. Build privacy in by design.
Right. Principle 2 is environmental responsibility. How does that connect to BCI and AI?
Well, all this tech has a physical footprint. Training complex AI models, running data centers, manufacturing hardware. It consumes enormous amounts of energy and creates electronic waste.
The carbon cost of computation.
Exactly. So conscious tech demands sustainable design. That means things like developing more energy-efficient algorithms, using recyclable or biodegradable materials and hardware, siting data centers near renewable energy sources, aiming for carbon neutrality. It's about acknowledging the planetary cost.
Okay. Principle 3 is inclusivity. We touched on this with the Global South Gap.
Yeah, this is crucial. Technology, especially AI trained on biased data, can easily amplify existing societal inequalities. Algorithmic bias is a huge problem.
So ensuring the tech works for everyone, not just certain groups.
Right. It requires actively building diverse teams, people with different backgrounds, perspectives, lived experiences, who are more likely to spot potential biases. And it means rigorously testing products across different demographics, age, gender, ethnicity, disability, to ensure equity is a core feature, not an optional extra. We have to consciously design against bias.
Makes sense. And the final one, principle 4, purpose over profit. This sounds like a fundamental shift in business philosophy.
It is. It's a direct challenge to the growth at all costs, maximize shareholder value above all else mentality that has dominated a lot of tech development.
So focusing instead on what? Social good.
Focusing on creating genuine value, solving real problems. The argument is that companies driven by a clear purpose beyond just making money, focusing on things like mental health, education, accessibility, environmental sustainability, will actually build more trust, attract better talent, and ultimately be more resilient and successful in the long run. Investors are starting to see that too. Purpose-driven companies might actually be better long-term bets.
Okay, so we've got the ethical frameworks, the accelerating hardware, the geopolitical context, and this emerging mandate for conscious tech. Taking all that into account, what can we realistically expect over the next, say, 10 to 20 years?
Right, let's look at the roadmap, starting with the hardware itself, neurotechnology development.
Yeah.
How will we be recording brain signals?
Will it still be those caps, the non-invasive stuff?
For widespread use, yes. EEG and FNIRs are likely to remain dominant simply because they're cheaper, portable, and safer. We can expect continuous improvements, especially with dry electrodes, making EEG much more user-friendly.
But what about the invasive tech? Will that stay confined to medicine?
The forecast suggests probably not exclusively. In the medium to long term, as the technology matures and safety improves, things like ECOG grids or even microelectrode arrays might become more ethically and medically acceptable, even for non-essential applications.
Like elective cognitive enhancement for healthy people.
Potentially, yes. If the risks can be sufficiently minimized, the superior signal quality offered by invasive methods will be very attractive for high-performance applications, maybe even including augmentation.
Okay. And on the flip side, stimulation actively influencing the brain. What's the outlook there?
Right now, transcranial electrical stimulation, TES, seems to have the best balance. It uses surface electrodes, applies a weak current, it's portable, cheap, non-invasive, and it's already showing promise in enhancing things like memory, attention, problem solving in lab settings.
But is there anything potentially better coming along?
The one to watch is focused ultrasound, FUS. Instead of electricity or magnets, it uses sound waves. The big potential advantage is much higher spatial resolution, being able to target smaller, deeper brain regions more precisely than TES or even TMS. And it could also be made highly portable.
What's the catch?
The main uncertainty is how feasible it will be for stimulating multiple brain sites simultaneously or in complex patterns, which you might need for sophisticated cognitive modulation. That's still being worked out.
Okay, so as the recording and stimulation tech evolves, where will we see the application acceleration? Where will BCI become routine first?
The predictions focus on areas where speed or secrecy are paramount. So expect BCI communication and control to become viable, maybe even routine, in domains needing reaction times faster than humans can manage. Physically think piloting advanced vehicles, controlling complex robotics, or situations requiring covert communication.
And the cognitive enhancement side, beyond the lab.
Yeah, significant progress is expected there too, moving into real-world applications. Things like accelerating personnel training, using CBCIs for improved group decision-making in complex fields, and maybe widespread use of passive BCIs for continuous cognitive monitoring.
Monitoring what, like fatigue or workload?
Exactly. Monitoring mental state in high-stakes jobs like air traffic control or surgery to improve safety and performance, that's already being trialed.
It sounds like a future of increasingly integrated minds and machines. But what are the big safety and ethical unknowns? What could go wrong?
Well, arguably the biggest one is what some researchers call the great unknown of stimulation.
Which is?
That's the lack of knowledge about the long-term effects of continuously using neurostimulation technologies like TES, TMS, DBS, or the upcoming FUS. We just don't have decades of data on what happens when you persistently alter brain activity patterns, especially in healthy brains, for enhancement purposes.
What's the specific worry?
The core fear is unintended consequences. That boosting one cognitive function, say, memory, might come at the hidden cost of impairing another function, maybe creativity or emotional regulation, or something we don't even routinely measure. We might only discover these negative trade-offs years or decades down the line after the tech is widely adopted. It's a huge potential risk.
Like unforeseen side effects with early drugs, but potentially affecting core cognitive abilities. That's sobering. What else?
Another major issue is the need for standardization. We touched on this with privacy, but it's broader. Robust, internationally agreed-upon standards for safety, efficacy, data security, and interoperability are lagging way behind the pace of R&D.
And without standards.
It creates risks. It hinders regulatory approval agencies like the FDA need clear benchmarks. We saw Synchron get FDA approval for their Stentrode, which is positive, but it's just one device. Lack of standards also exacerbates the privacy threat and makes it harder for developing countries, which often lack advanced testing facilities, to safely adopt or regulate these technologies.
So how do we navigate these unknowns? How do we mitigate the risks?
It has to be a combination of things. On the technical side, solutions like those mental passwords for privacy are crucial. We need to keep innovating ways to build safety and control into the devices themselves.
But then socially.
Ethically. Socially, it comes back to that conscious tech mandate. We need ongoing, open, intense, public and expert debate about the ethical lines we want to draw. The sources suggest that societal attitudes will likely change as people get more exposed to augmentation tech, similar to how plastic surgery or tattoos became more accepted. But that acceptance needs to be informed by ethical considerations, not just market forces. The values have to lead the technology. Hashtag outro. So we try to pull all these threads together. This whole deep dive really shows how the drive to augment human capabilities with BCI is now fundamentally tangled up with the philosophy of how we should govern machine behavior using frameworks like artificial consciousness. They're two sides of the same coin now.
And the only viable path forward, it seems, is through that value-driven approach. The conscious tech principles, ethics first, sustainability, inclusivity, purpose over profit. That's the proposed compass for navigating this incredibly complex territory.
Absolutely. Because the scale of investment, the geopolitical stakes, remember China's huge push and all means this technology is coming fast. Ensuring it's guided by the right values isn't just nice to have. It feels increasingly like an existential necessity.
The decisions we make in the next decade or so about how we integrate minds and machines will likely shape humanity's future in profound ways.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over. We talked about those collaborative BCIs, the CBCIs.
Right, the ones already showing they can help groups make decisions faster and more accurately than individuals.
Exactly. So if we are actively, intentionally building systems that prioritize and enhance collective neural processing systems where the networked group mind consistently outperforms the individual, what does that trend really predict?
Predict for the future of individual expertise.
Yeah. Think about high-stakes fields. Military command, complex surgery, corporate strategy, scientific discovery. If the networked, BCI-enhanced group becomes demonstrably superior, what happens to the value we currently place on individual brilliance, singular cognitive superiority, the lone genius?
Are we heading towards a future where complex decisions are always made by a synthesized collective intelligence, potentially marginalizing individual insight or contrarian thinking? Are we building systems that value the network over the node?
Are we automating individual genius or replacing it with something fundamentally different, a distributed, technologically mediated supermind? That's the trajectory we seem to be on.
Something profound to consider.
Indeed. That's the future we're stepping into, and that's the question we'll leave you with. Thank you for joining us for the Deep Dive.